Imagine walking into your boss's office with a smile on your face, ready to share the most exciting news of your life. News that you thought would be celebrated. News that made your heart feel like it was about to burst with joy, only to walk out of that same office 30 minutes later, carrying a cardboard box with everything you own stuffed inside it. Your hands are shaking, your eyes are burning, and the only sound you can hear over the noise of the open office floor is the quiet, humiliating whisper of your own dignity crumbling beneath your feet. That is exactly what happened to Melissa Grant. And what happened next? Well, that is the kind of story that people spend the rest of their lives telling at dinner tables, in boardrooms, and yes, right here on Crown and Karma Tales. Before we dive deep into the story, if you are new here, welcome to Crown and Karma Tales, the home of real stories about real people who wore their pain like a crown and let karma do the rest. If you have not already subscribed, do it right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a single story. And drop a comment down below. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from right now? Now let us get into the story, because trust me, every single word of it is worth your time. Melissa Grant was 29 years old when she landed what she genuinely believed was her dream job. She had spent 6 years working her way up through the corporate ladder of mid-sized marketing firms, building her skills, swallowing her pride when she had to, staying late when everyone else went home, and saying yes to every project that nobody else wanted to touch. She had done everything right, everything by the book. And when she finally got the call from Pinnacle Creative Solutions, one of the fastest growing advertising and branding agencies on the East Coast, she cried in her car for 15 minutes before calling her mother. The role was senior marketing strategist, and she was one of only 3 women in the entire senior team of 22. She noticed that immediately, but she told herself it would change. She told herself she would be part of that change. She walked in on her first day with her head high, her portfolio printed and polished, and an energy that made even the receptionist stop and smile. The CEO of Pinnacle Creative Solutions was a man named Douglas Harwick. Douglas was 54, silver-haired, well-dressed, and the kind of man who smiled with all of his teeth, but never with his eyes. He had built the company from small consultancy into a multi-million-dollar agency, and he wore that fact like armor every single day. He was respected in the industry. He was feared in the office. And he had opinions, very strong, very loud, very outdated opinions, about what a serious professional looked like and what they were capable of. Melissa had her first real interaction with Douglas in her 3rd week on the job. She had just presented a campaign concept for one of their biggest retail clients, a complete brand refresh that involved social media, experiential marketing, and a content strategy she had spent 2 weeks building from scratch. The room was quiet when she finished, and then Douglas leaned back in his chair, looked at her over his reading glasses, and said, "It's ambitious. Maybe too ambitious for where you are right now." The campaign she had proposed ended up being shelved. 3 months later, a nearly identical campaign was presented by one of the male senior strategists, and Douglas called it visionary. Melissa sat in that meeting room and felt something tighten in her chest. She wrote it down in the journal she kept on her nightstand. She kept a lot of things written down, but she did not quit. She did not shrink. She kept showing up, kept producing results, kept building relationships with clients who specifically asked to work with her. Within 18 months of joining Pinnacle, she had brought in 4 major accounts and had been responsible for campaigns that generated a combined revenue increase of nearly $3 million for the company. Her numbers were undeniable. Even Douglas could not deny her numbers. And then she got pregnant. She and her husband Marcus had been trying for over a year. When those 2 lines showed up on the test, they stayed up until 2 in the morning just talking, laughing, crying, and planning. It was one of the best nights of Melissa's life. And even though she knew the conversation at work would be complicated, because she was not naive about the world she worked in, she truly believed, that her track record would speak louder than any bias Douglas might carry. She requested a meeting with Douglas and her direct supervisor, a man named Kevin Stalls, who served as the head of strategy. She sat across from them both at a small conference table, and she told them the news with composure and professionalism. She outlined her plan. She was 12 weeks along. She intended to work fully through the pregnancy. She had already thought through the transition plan for her maternity leave. She was prepared to train a temporary replacement, and she was committed to ensuring none of her client accounts would feel any disruption. Douglas listened. He nodded. He said, "Congratulations, Melissa. We'll be in touch about next steps." She thought that meant they would talk logistics. She thought next steps meant planning. She went back to her desk feeling cautiously optimistic. For days later, Kevin called her back into the conference room. Douglas was not there this time. Kevin sat across from her with a document on the table between them and something on his face that she would later describe as practiced regret, the kind of expression someone puts on when they have already made their peace with doing something wrong. He told her that the company was going through a strategic restructuring. He told her that her role was being eliminated as part of a department realignment. He slid the document across the table. It was a termination agreement with a severance package, 30 days of pay, and a non-disclosure clause buried in the middle of the legal language. Melissa looked at the document. Then she looked at Kevin, and she asked him, very calmly, very directly, "Kevin, is this because I told you I was pregnant?" Kevin looked at the table. He said, "This is purely a business decision, Melissa." She did not sign the document that day. She stood up, picked up her bag, and said, "I'll need time to review this with my attorney." And Kevin's face shifted, just slightly, just enough for her to see that he had not expected that. She walked to her desk, packed her things into a box, and walked out of the building. And in the parking lot, she sat in her car for a long time. She did not cry. She was past crying. What she felt was something much more focused than grief. What she felt was clarity. The attorney she hired was a woman named Patricia Osei, a sharp and methodical employment lawyer who had spent 15 years handling exactly these kinds of cases. Patricia reviewed the timeline, reviewed Melissa's performance records, which Melissa had been smart enough to keep copies of at home, reviewed the communications, and within 1 week, she looked Melissa in the eye and said, "This is textbook wrongful termination. They fired you within 96 hours of learning about your pregnancy. Their so-called restructuring has no documentation predating your announcement. There's no paper trail for any business decision that would justify eliminating your specific role. This is retaliation, and it is illegal." Melissa filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She also instructed Patricia to file a civil lawsuit against Pinnacle Creative Solutions and named both Douglas Harwick and Kevin Stalls personally. She did not accept the NDA. She did not take the 30 days of severance. She went to war the proper way, through the legal system, with evidence, with patience, and with purpose. While the legal process moved forward, Melissa did something that most people in her position would not have had the mental bandwidth to do. She built. She was 7 months pregnant, technically unemployed, operating from a home office that was really just a corner of the bedroom with a folding table and a laptop, and she started a consulting business. She reached out to former clients, the ones who had specifically requested to work with her at Pinnacle. She told them she had gone independent. 3 of them responded within a week. 2 of them signed contracts within a month. She also started making calls to people she had been meaning to call for years. Industry contacts, former colleagues, investors she had met at conferences. She had a name she had already chosen for her company, Groundswell Strategic, because that was what she was building. Something that starts beneath the surface. Something that moves quietly and powerfully, and then reshapes everything it touches. Her daughter was born in the middle of all of it. Amara, 6 pounds, 8 ounces, and the loudest set of lungs Melissa had ever heard in her life. She took 2 weeks. Then she was back on the phone, back on email, back on Zoom calls with a baby monitor on the desk beside her. Marcus handled the nights. Patricia handled Douglas. Melissa handled everything else. The legal case settled faster than anyone expected. Douglas and the board of Pinnacle Creative Solutions, advised by their own attorneys, who had clearly looked at the evidence and understood exactly how exposed they were, came to the table with a settlement offer. It was substantial. Melissa would later say only that it was more than enough to change the trajectory of everything. She signed nothing that prevented her from speaking about what had happened to her in general terms. She was very specific about that clause. But here's where the story takes the kind of turn that makes you believe, truly believe, that there's something in this universe that has a longer memory than any of us. Around the same time that the settlement was finalized, Melissa received a call from a contact in the industry, a woman who sat on the board of a private equity group that had been quietly looking at distressed mid-size agencies for acquisition opportunities. The contact told Melissa that Pinnacle Creative Solutions was in trouble. The departure of several key clients, at least 2 of whom had left specifically because of what they had heard about how Melissa had been treated, combined with some poor strategic decisions that Douglas had made in the previous year, had put the company in a financially precarious position. The board was fractured. 2 major investors had pulled out. The agency was bleeding, and it was quietly and officially available for acquisition. Melissa sat with that information for exactly 24 hours. Then she called Patricia. She called her accountant. She called 2 of the investors she had been cultivating through Groundswell Strategic. And then she called Marcus and said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not say anything until I finish." The acquisition process took just under 3 months. It was not simple. It was not without obstacles. There were competing interests and complicated negotiations, and more than one moment where the whole thing looked like it might fall apart. But Melissa had something that the other parties at the table did not have. She had intimate knowledge of every account, every client relationship, every strength and weakness of that company. She had built some of its most successful campaigns. She knew where the bodies were buried and where the gold was hidden, and she wanted it. Not with the desperate energy of someone seeking revenge, but with the focused, unapologetic hunger of someone who had done the math and knew exactly what she was looking at. The deal closed on a Tuesday morning. Melissa Grant, formerly fired senior marketing strategist, currently pregnant and dismissed and told that her role had been eliminated, was now the majority owner and acting chief executive officer of Pinnacle Creative Solutions. She walked into that building on her first official day as its owner, and she felt the air in the room change. The receptionist, the same woman who had smiled at Melissa on her very first day at this company, saw her walk through the door and stood up from behind her desk. Melissa walked over to her and said, "It's good to be back." Douglas Harwick was no longer there. He had been pushed out during the acquisition negotiations, his equity position liquidated, his role dissolved, his name removed from the letterhead. He had landed briefly at another agency, but the settlement and the industry whispers had done their quiet, permanent work on his reputation. Last anyone heard, he was consulting independently, which is what people in the industry say when they mean someone is working alone because nobody will hire them. Kevin Stalls was a different story. Kevin was still at Pinnacle when Melissa took ownership. He was mid-level, replaceable, and had spent weeks visibly sweating about what his future at the company looked like. Melissa called him into the office that used to be Douglas's on her second day. She sat behind the desk that Douglas had sat behind when he had smiled at her with all of his teeth and promised to be in touch about next steps. Kevin sat down across from her and looked exactly like a man who had eaten something terrible and could not decide whether to swallow or spit. Melissa looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I want you to know that I am a professional and I intend to run this company professionally. Your employment status will be evaluated on the same basis as everyone else's, your performance, your contribution, and your fit within the new culture I am building here." Kevin nodded slowly. Then she slid a sheet of paper across the desk to him. It was a role reassignment notice. As part of a company-wide restructuring, real restructuring, documented and justified and legally sound, Kevin's senior position was being dissolved. He was being offered an alternative position within the company's facilities and operations support division. He looked at the paper. He looked up at her. He said, "Facilities and operations?" She said, "It includes building maintenance responsibilities. The compensation is commensurate with the role. You are welcome to accept the position, or you are welcome to resign. Either way, I respect your right to make that choice. Kevin resigned, but not before his first week in the new role, during which, and multiple people in that office witnessed this and spoke about it for a very long time afterward, Kevin Stalls, who had sat across from Melissa and called her termination a purely business decision, was assigned to clean the bathrooms on the third floor. He did it. He showed up with the cart and the gloves and the cleaning supplies, and he did it. And Melissa walked past him in the hallway on her way to a client meeting, Amara's photo on the lanyard around her neck, her name on the door of the corner office, and she did not say a single word. She did not need to. Groundswell Strategic became the in-house strategic division of the newly restructured Pinnacle Creative Solutions. Within the first year under Melissa's leadership, 3 of the clients who had left during the chaos returned. 2 major new accounts were signed. The agency launched an internal policy, one of the first in the industry, guaranteeing not just paid parental leave, but active career protection and reentry support for employees returning from any family-related leave. The policy was named internally. Melissa did not name it after herself. She named it after her daughter, the Amara policy. Melissa gave one interview about all of it, one carefully chosen platform, one carefully chosen journalist. In that interview, she was asked what she would say to Douglas Harwick if she could say anything to him directly. She thought about it for a moment, and then she said, "I would tell him thank you, because the day he decided I was not worth keeping, I decided I was worth everything." And that right there is what Crown and Karma Tales is all about. It is not just about revenge. It is not just about watching someone fall from a height they should never have reached. It is about the woman in the parking lot who does not cry. It is about the folding table in the corner of the bedroom. It is about the baby monitor on the desk and the phone calls made at midnight and the patience to let the universe set the table before you sit down to eat. Melissa Grant wore her pain like a crown, and karma showed up exactly on time. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone you know or something you have been through, please share it. Drop a comment and tell us what part hit you the hardest. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Join the Crown and Karma Tales family today, because we have got more stories exactly like this one waiting for you. Stories of people who were counted out, pushed down, underestimated and dismissed, and who came back in ways that nobody saw coming. Until next time, wear your crown, let karma work, and never, ever sign the NDA before you talk to an attorney.